I was born into the promise that the root would return. By the time my bones hardened around their first implants, the ancestral well was already a story carved into every corridor on continuity hulls, painted into crew bunks, murmured in medbays while the lights were low. A ship from before the fractures, from before the purity wars, circling a great dark mass and frozen in slowed time. Untouched, unsullied, ours. We learned the numbers before we learned our own teeth. Ratios of clocks, depth of the well. How many outside years slip past for every hour the root spends in orbit? My tutors would tap the table with knuckles scarred by graft lines. Do you understand, March? While you sleep a night, they sleep a night. While you become old, they barely become tired. We rotted. They stayed green. I understood, or I thought I did. There is a difference between reciting doctrine and watching it peel itself open on a live display. On the descent, when the black disk grew until it filled half the forward view and the ring of distant light blurred into a narrow crown, the bridge fell quiet. Not out of fear, out of anticipation. This was the moment all our cutting and stitching and pruning had been working toward. The Wellship dynasty was grown to do this one thing: slip down the throat of the galaxy, arrest its fall just above the final drop, and open its ribcage to receive the root. We had rehearsed every maneuver in shallower wells. We had burned so many volunteers calibrating how far a human frame can bend before gravity unthreads it. Our captain, old Corin with his spine fused to the command throne, watched the disc advance and rested an extra hand on the rail. The graft there was my work, a redundant arm built along his ribs for grip in high G turns. Approach corridor is stable, he muttered. Field gradients with intolerance, time ratios nominal. I watched the overlay, not the whole. A shrinking stack of numbers counting the distance between my own heartbeat and theirs. Somewhere below, lost in the dark ring where orbit becomes fall, a small research vessel from a civilization that never knew me went around and around, its crew thinking they were merely delayed. Their clocks crawled, hours raced. Outside, stars aged. Civilizations burned out. They slept a few hours. We did not come to wake them. We came because we were falling apart. Our purity doctrine began as mercy. That is how all cuts begin. Filter out the unstable alleles, the malignancies, the little mistakes. Clean the line, protect the children. Then the line narrowed and narrowed again until we needed scaffolds and symbiont webs and external organ banks just to keep our chosen frames upright. Every time we cut away a risk, we carved out something that used to fix us. So we built the doctrine of descent. We agreed that when the time came, we would go down and collect what we had thrown away. Our own ancestors, preserved entire in slowed time, perfect donors for a failing future. We called it integration. We drew diagrams that made it look like a union, not disassembly. We used words like sacred and return. We did not often use the simpler words that lurked underneath, because then we might hear the shape of what we were doing. Before we dropped into the deep corridor, I stood outside the integration theater and checked the restraints out of habit. Leather over metal. The leather eases bruising so tissue survives the graft. A kindness. The arms overhead ended in an array of tools, cutters, spreaders, clampers, each polished, each sharpened. My reflection looked back at me from the steel. One primary face, one secondary fused along the jaw for backup vision, both tired. You will be first to greet them, Corin had told me when he signed the orders. They are your field archivist surgeon. You have lived more inside their records than your own body. It is fitting. The title weighed heavier than the extra organs strapped to my ribs. I will show them respect, I promised. We prepared for this. At the time, I believed it. I believed a great many things before I saw their ship. To us, they were a silent artifact suspended in the dark, but inside that artifact, the descent was anything but quiet. By the time the alarm klaxon stopped glitching between tones, the worst of the gravity surge had passed. The medbay floor was still angled under my boots. The whole ship leaned a half-degree deeper toward the black, but the structural groans had eased. The overhead monitors steadied from wild spikes into a ragged plateau. I could pretend we were level if I did not look at the way the loose equipment all pressed toward one wall. "Hold still," I told the crewman on the table. His name was Lennox. Life support tech, mid-30s, hair shaved tight for convenience. He had been thrown across an access trench when the maneuver bucked. Now his thigh bone showed through a torn pressure suit like a pale rod smeared with red. He gripped the edge of the cot hard enough that the metal creaked. "This is still stable orbit, yeah?" "For certain values of stable," I answered. "Some humor helps. It does not fix anything, but it tightens the gap between panic and the next breath." I slid the bone back into place, guided by the medbay's skeletal imaging laid over his leg on my visor. The ship's surgeon kit anchored the fracture with printed plates and threaded them through with self-tightening sutures that would dissolve once the bone knit. The smell of cauterized fabric still hung in the room from when we cut his suit off. Acrid, like someone had burned plastic rain. "On your feet in a week," I told him. "No running marathons until then." "Never liked running anyway." He managed half a grin. I covered the access incision, sealed the suit tear with a patch, and palmed the cot controls. The bed rose on its rail, locking into place along the wall so it would not drift if we lost gravity control again. Outside the medbay, the corridor lights had shifted to a sodium tint. Emergency power. Full gravity had dropped by a notch. I felt it in the mild float in my gut when I stepped too quickly. "Sax, report!" Rios's voice reached me from the overhead panel, low and controlled. The ship's internal comm system always made him sound closer than he was. "Lennox's fracture is set," I answered. "No internal bleeding. I have 3 with bruises and 1 concussion in observation. We got off easy." The pause from his end was short. "Engineering got off worse. Meet me on command as soon as you can walk there without tripping over anything." The line cut. I took a moment alone in the medbay before I obeyed. Old habit. Inventory. 3 cots occupied, monitors green-yellow, drug lockers locked, trauma kit repacked. Hours ago, I had been a ship's physician on a routine near-horizon research mission, worried about bone density reports and minor radiation exposures. Now the floor slanted toward a singularity, and our captain had that tone in his voice that meant the numbers did not line up with the plan. I stepped into the corridor and started toward command. Half the crew had turned corridors and stairwells into impromptu work sites. A mechanic braced himself against a bulkhead while he tightened an access panel that had warped in the surge. A navigation tech hovered beside a junction box with a handheld, listening for changes in the pitch of a coolant pump. "Doc." The mechanic gave me a quick nod, fingers stained with sealant. "We going to die down here?" "Not today," I answered, because it was the only honest thing that did not make his hands shake. The command deck sat forward, close to the ship's center of mass. The closer to the center, the less gravity gradient you feel from one end to the other. In training, they call it a comfort choice. Right now, it felt more like an illusion of control. The hatch slid aside. Inside, the command deck was half-lit, panels alive with status halos. Rios stood at the main display, one hand hooked on the railing, dark hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. His gaze did not leave the central projection. The black hole filled most of it. A void in the starfield, edged with a narrow ring of distorted light. Closer in, the overlay showed the ship's orbit line, a thin thread skimming just above a thicker band marked in red. I had seen similar diagrams in simulation briefings, not with our marker this low. Rios glanced over without turning his head fully. "How bad?" "No one dead," I answered. "1 broken leg, a few concussions, bruised pride. The surge was rougher on the ship than on the people." "That's something." He flicked a control and the display shifted to show trajectories. Our original planned path traced a pale arc that swung near the horizon, let the black hole's gravity whip us around, then sent us climbing out on a higher velocity course. Clean, Neat. Signed off by a dozen safety committees. Our current track plunged deeper than that arc, then hooked back into a tight circle barely above the red band. "Walk me through it," I said. He tapped the lower section with the back of his knuckles. "We went in a little steeper than planned, micro-thruster drift. I could have corrected, but I thought we had margin." He breathed out through his nose. "Turns out the margin was thinner than advertised. A fuel spike during the burn pushed us past the safe corridor. Main drive overcompensated. We killed the fall, but we are sitting deeper," I finished. "In a pocket where the gravity gradient is steep and the time dilation is extreme." He gripped the rail a little harder. "We can hold this orbit for a while. Fuel can carry the station keeping, but we do not have the delta to climb all the way out now. Not without dumping mass we do not have." "How long is a while?" "Best case, a few weeks of ship time before we have to make a choice. Worst case, something breaks before then." "And outside?" I looked at the clock overlay. The ship time readouts were familiar. The outside time counter ticked at a rate that felt wrong, climbing faster than the seconds I felt pass. Rios angled the display so I could see a small window in the corner. "We pinged the master beacon at New Sol's relay station right before the maneuver. The reply just came in." I read the stamps. The last recorded sync with the beacon from our departure point had been... I did the conversion automatically. A habit from med school. We had been out for a handful of months by our clocks. The beacon's current log referenced events and dates centuries beyond our launch. "So, while we have been here for a few hours, the outside has gone through generations." Rios's voice stayed even. "The textbook examples are real now. We are deep enough that the ratio is brutal." I thought of the colonies whose immunization schedules I had memorized, of research colleagues whose kids I had seen in messages, all of them dust by now, if anyone still remembered their names at all. "We always knew this could happen," I muttered. "We drilled the numbers. We drilled coming down and climbing back up," he answered. "We did not drill getting stuck. Is rescue an option?" He flicked another control. A range of profiles stuttered across the screen, ships that could, in theory, reach a depth like ours. The energy curves all bent the wrong way. "They would spend unimaginable fuel to come this far down," he said. "For what? A small research vessel with what, 40 souls on board? We are not a colony ship. We are not a strategic asset. So we are on our own. Unless future humanity has turned into something generous and insane." Rios gave a humorless snort. "We cannot count on that." Somewhere deep in my memory, I felt the sting of another set of numbers. A medical boardroom. Charts of genetic risk profiles smoothed into averages. A projector showing how many defective births could be prevented if we allowed a certain therapy, and how many might be caused. Back then, we had voted to take a risk with other people's bodies to protect a statistical future. We all sensed the shape of a trap more quickly the second time. "What do you need from me?" I asked. "Honest projections on crew health under extreme dilation. If weeks for us are millennia outside, we could outlive the civilization that sent us. That matters for what we choose next." "You think the rest of humanity might be gone by the time we burn the last atom?" "I think I do not know what waits out there now. So I want options. Can our people survive a long stay deep near the horizon, if we take everything as far into conservation as we can? What does that do to minds, bones, organs? I need numbers, practical ones." I nodded. "I will give you scenarios. Not cheerful ones, but they will be real." "Good." He turned back to the display. "In the meantime, we hold this orbit and run every efficiency trick we have. We bought ourselves time. We use it." The universe outside our little bubble accelerated away. The contact came 6 hours later, ship time. I was in medbay again, rewriting our long-stay protocols in a way that assumed gravity gradients, limited thrust corrections, and a crew slowly realizing that their lives might end in a circling fall. My mind kept drifting. In another life, I had signed off on a genome edit therapy for colonial embryos. It had been pitched as a shield against radiation-triggered cancers, a suite of activated repair pathways that would wake when damage built beyond a threshold. On paper, it was elegant. In practice, it overcorrected. Cells that should have died quietly instead refused to let go. They thickened, layered, turned into growths that strangled organs. We caught it early enough to halt further use, but not before a wave of children on one world grew up, with bodies that betrayed them in slow, suffocating ways. The board ruled that we had acted within guidelines. No one was punished. Policies were adjusted. The guilt stayed with the people who had signed their names. Mine was on that list. The intercom chimed in a tone reserved for only a handful of priorities. "Dr. Sachs to command," the overhead announced. "You need to see this." On the command deck, the main display had switched from orbit lines to a forward view. Sheer black filled the frame. That same circular absence, its edge chaotic where distant starfields bent around it. Above that edge, in the region marked on our overlays as a slightly safer corridor, a shape descended. It was not any hull design I recognized from our own era. Instead of clean cylinders and modular rings, this thing had a spine like the keel of some ancient sea creature, curved and reinforced, from which ribs extended. Between the ribs, surface plating grew in uneven panels, as if poured and allowed to harden around an underlying skeleton. Clusters of pods hung along the flanks on jointed arms. They swayed slightly as the ship adjusted its attitude, like fruit on a tree in slow wind. "Size estimate?" I asked. "Roughly twice our length, maybe 3 times the mass," offered Varga at navigation, fingers playing the controls. "It is using thrust opposite the gradient, but there is a stabilization field of some kind wrapped around its midsection. I cannot match the profile to anything in the database." "It is riding the same side of the well as we are," Rios observed quietly. "Just a little higher. Deep, but not as deep as us." "Someone coming to rescue us." Varga tried for lightness and failed. Rios did not answer that. He studied the newcomer for another heartbeat, then lifted his chin. "Open a narrowband hail, standard language packet." We did not have many choices this deep. Communication tech Quan worked the panel. Narrowband targeted, transmission away. We waited. Time dilation makes intership delays small when you are this close together. Even so, every second stretched. The newcomer did not respond immediately. Its drive glow shifted. Some of the pods on its flanks retracted like fists clenching. A faint sheath of light bloomed around its midsection, a containment field reacting to the wild gravity deeper down. Then the comm channel snapped open. The voice that came through was male, mid-range, calm. The accent twisted English into an unfamiliar rhythm, like a dialect evolved in isolation for centuries, then run through a translation filter that smoothed the worst of it but left the bones. "This is Dynasty, Wellship of the Continuity," the voice announced. "We descend by right and charter to retrieve the route." Rios glanced toward me. "This is Vestige, research vessel of the United Terran Consortium. You are entering a restricted experiment zone. Identify your origin and intent." A brief crackle. Then the same voice, patient, almost indulgent. "Your designation data is archival. The consortium you name has not existed for a very long time. You orbit the ancestral well. You are the root. We come to integrate you." The skin at the back of my neck tightened. "Integrate," Rios repeated. "Clarify your meaning." "We will explain," the voice replied. "It is customary to show our faces for this conversation." The main display split. On the right, the external view remained. On the left, a visual from their side unfolded. A man sat in a restraint chair that looked grown into the floor rather than bolted to it. The chair's uprights curved around his shoulders like branches supporting a nest. He wore no helmet. The background behind him was a wall of pale plates, veined and uneven. Perhaps armor, perhaps something more organic. He had 2 faces. That was my first thought. Then I saw that only one was fully formed. A strong-boned main face with deep hollows under the eyes, dark hair shaved close. The second was fused along the jawline on the right, a smaller structure with an eye sealed shut, mouth mostly covered in scar tissue, like a developmental backup that had been partially absorbed. His chest harness held more mysteries. Under a translucent mesh of plastic and fabric, small masses pulsed in slow rhythm. Reserve organs, extra hearts or lungs perhaps, their lines fed into his body through conduits embedded in his skin. When he moved his shoulders, there was a stiffness to it, the slow care of someone who carries delicate equipment inside their own ribs. "I am March," he announced, archivist surgeon of the continuity, charged with handling the root. He smiled with only the primary mouth. My medical brain had already started cataloguing visible anomalies, extra organs for redundancy, a partially fused twin left as a structural support, implants along the forearms that glinted like sheathed tools. Beside me, Rios kept his voice level. "We did not dispatch any signal for assistance. Who are the continuity?" March tilted his head. "We are your descendants." The word hung over the command deck. Varga whispered something in a language from his homeworld. Rios did not move. "Explain." "In brief," March seemed almost pleased, "your vessel was launched from a civilization that merged earthbound and orbital habitats under a common charter. That charter fractured, but the records remained. We are the inheritors of one of those fragments, the one that maintained the archives and the lineages." His gaze sharpened. "You were sent to skim a supermassive gravity well. Your orbit lies so deep that your clocks crawl, hours for you, ages for the outside. We discovered the mission in our records long after your launch and realized what you represented." He lifted one hand, palm up. The skin there was faintly translucent. "You are a perfectly preserved ancestral sample. Whole bodies untouched by centuries of edits, fads, plagues, and improvisations. Every defect you carry, every strength, every variant preserved by the well." I felt suddenly aware of every cell in my own skin. "You have been watching us." "Not continuously," March answered. "The cost to come this far down is high, but we positioned telescopes at shallower radii. We tracked your orbit. We watched your pings when they rose enough to be heard. And you chose now to descend. The energy reserves to make this descent are rare." March's tone held no apology. "We gathered them over generations. We dared the well when our own reserves ran thin." "What do you want from us?" I asked before Rios could phrase it more politely. March's eyes shifted to me. "You are medical." "How did you know?" "You are standing in a way that spares your dominant hand," he observed. "Your shoulders are used to lifting people, not tools. And you are the only one looking at my implants rather than my extra face." He was not wrong. "We require integration," he continued. "Our line has been narrowed for many cycles. To keep it stable and clean, we replaced more and more of our failing tissue with scaffolds and symbionts. Now those scaffolds themselves require infusion from ancestral stock, from you." He smiled again, factual. "We have come to collect what is owed." "Owed," Rios repeated, quieter this time. March spread his hands, the gesture at odds with the devices grafted along his forearms. "You did not know you were giving this gift. That is the mercy of it. Your civilization cast us forward with its risks. We bear the consequence. In return, you exist here in slowed time, kept fresh for us. An entire ship of unspent correction." "Correction," I echoed. "We have carried the doctrine of descent for a very long time," he went on. "When your orbit settled into this depth, it was recorded as a sign. The root sealed in the well, untouched. We agreed that when our need grew great enough, we would descend, stabilize our fall just above yours, and integrate the root into the living continuity." "And by integrate," Rios pressed, "you mean what exactly?" "Graft," March answered simply. "Transplant. Incorporate. We will disassemble your cohort with care, preserve each organ and segment, and merge them into our own frames and into our stored banks. Your tissues will not be wasted. They will become part of bodies that will endure. A cold, practical truth. No malice in it. That made it worse. You are talking about cutting up my crew, Rios said, the calm fraying at the edges now. I am talking about saving my own, March returned. You are not the first donors we have used. You are simply the most precious. I stepped closer to the display until I could see the faint twitch in the sealed eye of his secondary face. You call us descendants' property. You call us owed. You understand we are alive, yes? That we have not consented to any of this. March's gaze softened in his way. Consent is a luxury of shallow wells and plentiful options. We live in neither. You are alive, yes, for now. But your trajectory is pinned. Without outside intervention, your ship will burn its fuel, drift, and eventually cross the horizon. You will die, unharvested, and the structure of your bodies will be lost to us forever. He leaned back in his grown chair. We offer you a different end, to be distributed, to continue, to shore up what your own age began to erode. Even if you reject, the orbit will do its work. You will not climb out alone. All you can choose is what you become on the way down. In another context, it would have been a philosophical argument. Here, it was logistics dressed in reverence. Rios drew in a slow breath. We need time to consider your offer. You have little, Captain. March glanced off-screen and tapped something out of view. Your station-keeping expenditures are visible in your exhaust traces. Your fuel reserves are finite, as ours are. We cannot hover here forever on gesture alone. He looked back at me. Dr. Sachs, is it? I request a preliminary genomic exchange. We will transmit a sample of our own lineage markers. You will transmit a sample of yours. It will confirm for you that we are what we claim. Your future, not a trick of the well. How do you know my name? The question slipped out. He almost looked puzzled. You are in your registry. Your medboard decisions are in our archives. You signed off on therapy line Kappa on New Sol Colony, did you not? That was sealed. Not from us, he answered. We are the continuity. We keep records, we grew out of them. The air in the command deck thinned, despite the environmental gauges holding steady. We will transmit the markers now, March finished. We will maintain position at our current radius. Consider our terms, Root. His gaze tracked across our faces one last time. The longer you delay, the more wasteful the eventual resolution will be. The screen cut back to the external view. The dynasty hung above us, balanced on its fields, ribs outlined by the faint glow of its drive against the darkness. On a side panel, a data packet pinged into our buffers. Quan cleared his throat. Genetic sample incoming. Structurally, it looks human, lot of modifications. But the baseline framework is familiar. Send it to Medbay, I told him. I will run a quick comparison against our own. Rios did not look away from the black disk and the ship hanging above it. Do it, he murmured. If they are lying, we need to know how. If they are not... He trailed off. If they are not, then most of what we thought about our future just walked in the door and asked for our organs. Back in Medbay, the usual hum of background work had turned tentative. Crewmen checked supplies more quietly. The 3 patients on the cots watched the overhead screens instead of dozing. I sealed myself in my office nook, pulled the sample from the continuity into the genomic analyzer, and set it to run against a fresh draw of my own blood. The machine chirped acknowledgement and began its work. On the little display, strings of base codes and simplified markers slid past, aligning, mismatching, aligning again. Genomics is as much art as it is math. Looking at the raw sequences is like trying to read someone's life in the pattern of hairs on their arm. You need context. I watched the high-level summary instead. Clusters, markers, inheritance blocks that show shared ancestry. The continuity sample lit up those blocks like stars after dark. There were differences, of course. Layers of edits, insertions, tailored segments that screamed medical intervention. Their symbiont markers alone formed an intricate mess of engineered sections. But underneath that, under the scaffolds and graft-friendly tags, the spine of the genome was ours. Not just ours as in human. Ours as in descended from the same regional stock that gave me my eye color. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. Once, during my residency, I discovered that a boy in my care carried a rare combination of risk markers for a degenerative nerve condition. The odds that he would develop it were low, but not negligible. His parents had the right to know. I had the obligation to tell them. I remember how they looked at me when I gave them the information, like I had reached into a bag and pulled out a future they had not ordered. Now the future was returning the favor. The intercom chimed. Rios again. Well? They are us, I answered, in the broad strokes. Enough shared markers to prove common descent. Enough edits to prove a very long time between us. How long? Thousands of years at least, relative to their experience. More in outside time, given where we are. I rubbed my forehead. They identified a therapy line I approved on New Sol. That tells us something about how deep they have dug into our records. Rios was quiet for a moment. Can we fight them? In a straight physical sense? I pictured their ship's mass, the pods along its flanks, whatever drive it was using to sit calmly where the well wanted it to fall. We are a research vessel with limited armament. They are built for this descent. If they want to come down to our radius and dock, I doubt we can stop them forever. What about biologically? Diseases? Toxins? If they are this reliant on symbionts and implants, they are probably very good at filtering unfamiliar threats, and anything we release will have to fight uphill through that. Besides, I am not eager to start a war by throwing random plagues at our descendants when we are sharing the same well. If they thrash, they could destabilize both our orbits. So what you are telling me is that we cannot outrun them, we cannot outgun them, and we probably cannot infect them without infecting ourselves. For now. I forced myself to add that last part. For now we are outmatched. That does not mean we stop thinking. Keep thinking fast, Rios replied. They are not here for a tour. The line went dead. I looked back at the analyzer display. The continuity's symbiont markers remained a chaotic overlay. There were faint reflections of patterns I had seen in that outlawed therapy line, the one that refused to let cells die. Similar enzyme triggers, similar activation thresholds. Whoever designed the continuity's scaffolds had started from the same family of tools. They had pushed them much further. Outside the medbay, the ship's spine vibrated with a gentle correction burn, holding our orbit, holding us in the amber while the future waited just a little higher up, patient and hungry. Rios did not convene a full meeting. Word had already raced through the ship in compressed rumors. Future humans, genetic debt, integration. He met with the department heads in command and left the rest to us to carry back. His summary over the intercom later was concise. We have been contacted by a vessel from a future human lineage. They claim descent from our civilization. They believe our presence in this well entitles them to our bodies as ancestral stock. We have not agreed to any terms. While this situation develops, all hands remain on duty. Continue conserving supplies and energy. Maintain discipline. No mention of hope. None offered, none withdrawn. In the mess hall, crew ate in ones and twos. Conversations stayed low. No one wanted to risk speculating loudly about how it might feel to be disassembled with care. Quan cornered me by the drinking station later. Doc, straight answer. Is there any version of this where we walk away with all our parts in the same places? I do not know yet, I answered. But we are not handing you over as a bag of organs on the basis of one sermon from a man with more hearts than manners. That coaxed a breath of a laugh from him. Appreciate the imagery. At the end of the first long shift after contact, I lay in my bunk, webbing tight across my chest to keep me from drifting into the wall if gravity fluctuated again, and stared at the faint glow of the status strip along the ceiling. We had always known, in a training manual way, that time dilation near a black hole meant our mission would see the world outside change faster than we did. It was a curiosity. A note in the psychological considerations appendix. There had been jokes even. We go out, skim the well, come back, and everyone is using slang we do not understand. Maybe we get to skip a few fads. No one had warned us that one of those fads might be a civilization that grew brittle around the idea that our bodies were theirs to correct their mistakes. My core fear has always been simple, that I will stand in a room with someone's future in my hands and choose for them in a way that hurts more than it heals. I had done it once, with a therapy line and a projector full of risk curves. Now the future had sent a surgeon down the well to return the favor. Sleep did not come easily. Somewhere above, unseen through the bulkheads, the dynasty held station. For us, it had only just arrived. For its builders, the descent had been the end of a plan laid down by men who had died before my grandparents were born. The past rarely gets a vote when the future arrives. But we were still here, circling the dark. Until we stopped breathing, we had a say. The first impact registered as a hard, clean thud along the forward hull. Not a micrometeorite ping, not the low groan of a gravity correction. A flat hit, like someone slapping the outside of our world with an open hand. I was in medbay, checking Lennox's fracture for swelling. The deck gave a tiny shiver under my boots, just enough to make the instruments on the counter dance. Lennox lifted his head. "That normal?" "No." The intercom chimed at once, Rios's voice carried through the ceiling. "All department heads to command. Hull contact near Ring 4, possible boarding attempt." My chest tightened in a way no training drill had ever managed. "Do not try to walk on that leg," I told Lennox. "If you fall and break it again, I am installing a brace you will hate for the rest of your life." He managed a crooked grin. "So optimistic, Doc." I grabbed my kit, field scanner, trauma pack, basic decon spray, and headed for the lift. The corridor outside humoured the alarm with a low red strip along the floor. Crew moved with purpose now, not the hanging around tension of earlier. Helmets under arms, tool belts checked twice. On the command deck, the main display showed the black hole in all its calm violence. The dynasty rode higher up the well, balanced on its own drives. A smaller shape clung to our hull near Ring 4, dug in at an angle. I stepped closer. "That from them?" "Nothing else out here to throw at us," Rios answered. The object mated to our hull was roughly barrel-shaped, but the surface broke that simple outline. Plates overlapped in irregular ways, as if grown rather than machined. A ring of broad teeth circled the contact point. Each tooth was a wedge of pale material, dull at the edges, already biting into our plating. "Boarding pod," Varga muttered. "At least it is not subtle." "Any pressure loss?" I asked. Quan shook his head over his station. "No breach yet. Internal sensors show stress on the hull around segment 4B, but no leak." Rios pointed at the display. "Look at how it grips. See those little movements? It is adjusting to keep purchase as the gradient tries to peel it off. Organic actuators, maybe." He was right. The teeth flexed a fraction in sequence, gripping like a row of hooked knuckles. I remembered March's calm face, the extra organs under his harness. This was the same design logic scaled up. Grow what you can, bolt on what you must. "What happens if they get through the hull?" Quan's voice had lost any attempt at humor now. "They make a door," Rios answered. "Then they walk in." "In suits?" I asked. "If they are used to their own gravity wells, maybe they are fine in this one," Rios muttered. "Either way, I have no interest in learning how polite their boarding procedures are." He tapped the intercom. "Damage control teams, gear up. We are going to cut that thing off before it chews its way in. Security seal Ring 4 access. Medical, be ready for depressurization injuries." I lifted my kit. Already moving. We did not waste time on a detailed plan. The basic idea was simple. Get a team to the interior side of the hull where the pod clung, brace them, and blow the bolts on that hull segment from our side while cutting through the pod's teeth. Push it off before it penetrated. The complexity came from gravity. The closer you are to the black hole, the more every meter matters. One side of the pod felt a slightly different pull from the other side. Our hull plating flexed in slow, dangerous ways under that shear. A bad cut in the wrong place could help the thing in instead of peeling it off. I joined the damage control squad in Ring 4. The corridor there sloped around the curve of the ship. The floor angled just a little more toward the well than my inner ear liked. The air tasted dry, overused filters straining to keep up. The pod's arrival had set off a local alarm. A band of yellow stripes marched along the walls toward a closed bulkhead. Chief Garrett, our lead on hull repairs, met me at the access hatch. His beard was uneven from a rush trim earlier. He must have taken scissors to it when someone reminded him that loose hair in a depressurizing corridor is a bad idea. "You sure you want to be down here, Doc?" He secured the last strap on his harness. "We popped this thing wrong. That hatch behind you is the only thing between you and vacuum. If you get injured and I am not here, I will hear about it forever. Besides, if whatever they are using tries to crawl through, I am the one who knows how to kill it." He grunted. Fair enough. We all clipped tethers to the corridor rail and checked each other's seals. The hatch wheel spun and locked open with a low thump of pressure equalization. Suit sensors read the air beyond as cooler, like the environmental system was prioritizing other sections. The pod's contact zone bulged into the corridor wall ahead, deforming the metal until it looked like the hull was trying to swallow a boulder. The teeth we had seen from outside had already chewed shallow grooves through our plating. Fine dust crumbled from the cuts and drifted, slow motion, to settle on the deck in a line. Close up, the pod's skin had a faint texture, a cross of growth rings and machining marks. Tubes ran along its side, some metal, some something else that gleamed wetly where the insulation peeled. "Explosive charges placed along the internal braces," Garrett reported into his wrist mic. "Ready to detach segment on your mark, Captain." Rios's voice came back from the overhead speaker. "You are clear to cut their grip first. Once the structural readings are in the safe band, I will trigger the bolts. Do not get clever." Garrett gestured to two techs in cutting rigs. They stepped forward with handheld cutters, short rods that projected a narrow cone of energy hot enough to burn through hull plating. Used carefully, they could slice metal without turning the air into a death fog. "Start with the outer teeth," I told them. "If this thing has a nervous system, it will feel that before it feels the bolts. Maybe it backs off." Garrett grunted again. "You think it is alive?" "Parts of it," I answered. "They like blending flesh and machine." The first cutter touched the base of a tooth. The metal sang under the beam, a shrill sound like a stressed cable. The tooth's pale material blackened and flaked. A thin thread of something inside curled and snapped. The pod reacted, not dramatically. No sudden lurch, just a subtle tightening, the remaining teeth digging a fraction deeper. The grooves in our hull lengthened by a hair. Garrett muttered a curse. "It is compensating." "Good," I said. "It means we can hurt it." Both cutters worked now, moving in a slow circle, taking out teeth a pair at a time. Each cut gave the pod less to grip with, but every removal made the remaining teeth load more force onto their bite. The hull flex reading on Garrett's wrist crept toward a red band. "Captain, our margin is shrinking," he warned. "If we do not pop this panel soon, it might go on its own." Rios's reply came without delay. "You have 30 seconds. After that, I trigger, whatever your people are doing. Understood?" "Understood." One of the teeth finally snapped completely. A small segment of the pod's skin peeled away with it, exposing an inner layer. Under the irregular armor, the interior surface gleamed with a sheen that was not metal. A mesh of dark strands ran across it, embedded in a pale matrix. The strands branched and joined like tree roots, some of them throbbing gently, pushing thicker fluid along. When the tooth tore free, nearby strands tightened and rearranged, pulling new support into place around the gap. "Symbiont web," I murmured. "They are using living tissue as part of the grip." Garrett shot me a look. "That's supposed to make me feel better? Only if you like knowing what you are fighting." The mesh twitched again. One of the thicker strands uncurled toward the cut, as if probing for the source of damage. When the cutter swept closer, the strand flinched away, then pressed in again. "It is sensing the heat," I realized. "Either thermal response or direct nerve analog. Keep roasting it." The cutting techs leaned into their work. Teeth fell away faster now, some cracking off at the roots, others sliced cleanly. The whole flex gauge edged into the danger band. "Time," Rios said. "Detonating bolts in 3, 2, 1. The corridor lurched. The inner braces of that hull segment carried small, shaped charges meant for quick jettison in an emergency. Detonating them shears the segment free, allowing it to blow away under internal pressure or external force. We felt it as a heavy jerk toward the pod, then a rebound as the freed panel shifted. Then the pod lost its balance. On the hull cam, viewed later, it must have looked almost graceful. The pod, suddenly lacking a solid anchor, sliding sideways along the curvature of the ship, teeth scraping new lines, then losing grip completely and drifting off into the deeper well until its own stabilization fields caught it. From our side, it felt like the world hiccuped and then relaxed. The bulge in the corridor wall smoothed out as the freed panel moved. Dust cascaded down in slow sheets. Garrett let out a rough breath. "Panel detached, no breach. Nice timing." "Minimal external velocity on the pod," Quan reported over the speaker. "They are catching it with their fields. It is not falling into the horizon. Yet." I stepped closer to the exposed inner face where we had glimpsed the mesh. A smear of it remained on the hull. Torn strands, droplets of thick fluid clinging to the metal in a ragged ring. At first glance, the torn symbiont mass looked like a mess of blood vessels and plastic gel. Up close, the branching pattern triggered a very specific memory. The way the strands looped around one another, the particular spacing of thicker nodes. It was familiar. Kappa had used a growth matrix not entirely unlike this. We had built it to cradle cells in 3 dimensions to encourage healing in a uniform way. The continuity had taken that principle and grown a whole ship around it. "Doc?" Garrett's voice cut through my focus. "Do we need to scrape that crap off, or is it dead?" I lifted the scanner and passed it over the smear. The display showed spikes of activity where the strands still twitched toward each other, trying to reconnect across the gap. "It is not dead," I answered. "But it is hurt. We should not give it the chance to regrow." Garrett already had one of the techs swinging a torch in low arc. "Turn it to charcoal?" "Charcoal would be an improvement," I agreed. The cutter flared white over the stain. The strands writhed once more and then stilled. A thick, oily smoke rolled into the corridor, coating our visors in a film that looked like burnt organic sludge. The tech wiped his faceplate and turned his head. "Seal that panel," I told Garrett. "Then get decon teams through here and log every place this stuff touched." As we backed away and the hatch rolled shut behind us, I could not shake the sense that we had just brushed against a nerve, not only in the pod, but in something larger. We had seen the underside of the continuity's grip, and I recognized the pattern. They called again an hour later, after we had patched the detached segment and flushed the local vents twice. I was still in medbay, cataloguing a tissue sample scraped from the hull before we burned it. Under the scope, the symbiont strands looked even more like Kappa descendants. The same enzyme locks, the same silly little signature motif one of my colleagues had added as an inside joke. We had thought that making our scaffold tissue able to survive almost anything was ambitious. The continuity had taken that arrogance and built a society on it. "Sax to command," Rios's voice came over the intercom. Our guests would like to discuss our response. Bring your best bedside manner. I am more in the amputation mood, I muttered. Lennox smirked from his cot. Take pictures. If they have more faces than that surgeon, I want to know. Command felt tighter than before, though nothing had changed in its dimensions. Maybe it was the knowledge that something had just tried to chew a way in. The main display showed March again. His grown chair framed him like the back half of a ribcage. The extra organs under his harness moved in slow rhythm. No sign of strain from the lost pod. Captain Rios, he began, inclining his head a fraction. Dr. Sachs, it is efficient to speak to you both. Rios stood with his arms folded. Your boarding pod hit our hull without introduction. We detached it. If that was a test of our courtesy, I hope we failed. March's mouth curved. We expected resistance. I confess I wanted to see how your hull responded. It has not been easy to model. Glad we could help your research. There is an old principle, March went on, ignoring the bite in Rios's tone. If you cannot take what you need by clean force, you turn to negotiation. You are skipping a step. I do not accept that take what you need is the default. March spread his hands. Words. We stand on opposite sides of a well with only so many maneuvers left. Let us not waste them arguing abstractions. His gaze sharpened. I am authorized to offer a concession. The word landed with more weight than his earlier doctrine. Concession meant limits. It meant he was not as in control as he wanted us to believe. Rios straightened. I am listening. There are many bodies aboard your ship, March continued. More than we strictly require to stabilize our own line. If you yield a portion of your crew for integration, alive, intact, under my personal supervision, we will commit resources to raise your vessel with ours when we climb out of the well. The remainder of your crew will be relocated to continuity habitats, their autonomy respected within our laws. He let that sit. Behind me, I felt Quan go very still at his station. How many is a portion? Rios asked. A third would be generous, March replied. Half would be optimal. You want to cut apart half my crew, Rios said quietly, and in return you will treat the rest as honored refugees. They will live, March returned. They will have children. They will tell their stories. If you refuse, all of you will die in this well when your fuel runs out, and our line may die with you. I am offering an outcome in which 2 branches continue instead of none. He believed this. That made it harder to dismiss him as a monster invented for a campfire story. Rios glanced at me. Medically speaking, could you identify who among us would be the most valuable to them? The question was a metal taste along my tongue. I can map genetic diversity, I answered. I can identify carriers of rare alleles, strong immune profiles, clean organ histories, if that is what you mean. It is, March put in. Our doctrine prizes certain traits. We can transmit a priority profile, and Dr. Sachs can match it against your crew. We accept volunteers above all, but if volunteers do not fill the quota, selection must occur. He looked almost sympathetic. Better you choose than we take at random. I felt every eye on the deck shift my way. There is no better in that sentence, I said. Rios's voice dropped. Henry, think beyond yourself for a second. If the choice is between everyone dying in orbit or some of us dying so the others get a chance, that is not what he is offering, I cut in. He is offering to kill some of us slowly and thoroughly, turn us into spare parts, and keep the rest in a system that treats people as maintenance kits. I pointed at the display. Listen to his language. We are not passengers to him. We are components. And if we refuse, we all die as corpses drifting just above the horizon, Rios shot back. Components the well cannot use. You want that on your conscience? I met his gaze. I already have a pile of children on my conscience thanks to a decision I made for them in a clean, bright boardroom. I am not adding you and everyone else in this ship to that stack by choosing who gets fed into that thing's chest. March watched our exchange with the clinical interest of a surgeon observing a reflex. "It is not unusual," he noted, "for the roots to resist the first framing of the offer. That is why we based our charter on the final state, not the initial discomfort." Rios drew in a breath through his nose, then let it out slowly. He looked back at March. "We will not decide this on one conversation." "You do not have the luxury of many," March replied. "Your reserves fall, ours do as well. I will give you one cycle of your ship's full rest period. When next we speak, I will require a trajectory. Acceptance, partial acceptance with terms, or refusal. Do not mistake this for cruelty. It is logistics." The temptation to fling something at the screen was strong. Instead, Rios leaned on the rail. "If we accept, how does it begin?" "With a demonstration," March answered. "You have seen a grazing attempt. Next, you should see the process itself, so that you make your decision with clear vision. We will transmit a live integration event." "Do not volunteer any of ours for that," Quan muttered under his breath. "We will use an existing donor, not from your vessel. Consider it transparency." The channel closed. Rios turned to me. "You will not give me a list." "No. If I order it." "Then I will refuse that order, and you can lock me in my own medbay," I answered. "Then you will have to explain to everyone why you have a physician in restraints while you hand them off to be carved up." The deck stayed quiet. Varga shifted his weight from one foot to the other and stared hard at his console. "This is not a simple never-compromise moment," Rios muttered. "We are lion food, Henry. That is the scale of our problem. Sometimes you throw meat so the rest get away. Except in this case, the lion is offering to take half the camp with it afterward," I replied. "And the meat you throw gets welded into its spine." We held each other's gaze for a few breaths. There was no hatred there. Just two different nightmares competing for priority. "Go back to medbay," Rios said finally. "Figure out everything you can about that tissue you scraped off. If you cannot give me a list, give me leverage." That, at least, I knew how to try to do. When they sent the feed, I watched it from medbay with the door locked. Because I knew if the whole crew watched it in real time, half of them would sprint to the airlocks with tools, and the other half would curl up in their bunks and not come out. Better to see it first, filter, then decide how much to share. The transmission opened with a view of a room aboard the Dynasty. The camera position was fixed, anchored high in a corner. No dramatic angles, no artful shadows, just a clear look at how they worked. The integration theatre was larger than our medbay and less cluttered. The floor was metal, polished from use. The walls were lined with racks holding organ canisters, transparent cylinders filled with pale fluid in which hearts, lungs, segments of muscle, stretches of intestine, and other less obvious pieces floated. Thin filaments ran from the cylinders into distribution lines overhead. In the center of the room stood a chair fused to the floor. It had restraints at wrists, ankles, chest, and head, all padded. Overhead, a gantry held surgical arms, articulated limbs ending in bundles of interchangeable tools. A donor already lay in the chair. He was male, roughly my age, naked from the waist up. His skin carried a patchwork of old scars and newer graft lines that did not match the neat continuity aesthetics. His hair had been shaved recently. A shadow remained. His eyes were open, fixed on a point above him. A translation overlay in the corner of the feed labeled him Acquired Donor Outer Fracture Culture. March entered the frame from the left. Up close, the extra organs under his harness were more obvious, small, rounded masses pulse, moving in offset rhythm. His primary face wore a calm, focused expression. His secondary eye remained sealed. He spoke, but the audio was muted. Some ritual words, probably. A few staff moved along the wall, checking canisters, ensuring flow valves were open. They wore no masks. Whatever they feared catching, they trusted their implants more than cloth. March placed a hand on the donor's chest, just below the collarbone. He pressed, feeling for something. The donor's breath sped up. He tried to pull against the restraints, but they held. Then, the procedure began. The overhead arms descended. One arm carried a cutting tool, narrow and sharp. Another bore a spreader, a device shaped like slender tongs that could slip into an incision and pry it open without tearing. I felt my own muscles tense in involuntary sympathy as the cutter traced the first line. March did not open the chest straight down the middle like in old Earth textbook surgeries. He cut in angled paths along existing graft lines, preserving certain junctions, bypassing others. He moved with the familiarity of someone performing the same operation for years. The cutter parted skin, then tissue, exposing a flash of ribs. The spreader eased in, pushing muscles aside. There was very little blood. The donor's vessels constricted under smart drug control, or perhaps the symbionts within them knew when to clamp. From the racks, one of the organ canisters disengaged and slid along the overhead rail, guided by a mechanical arm. Within it, a heart beat steadily, isolated but active, fed by its own micropump. March opened the donor's chest wider. Inside, the original heart had been partly integrated with a web of symbiont strands. Thin, dark filaments laced around the muscle, tunneling into its walls, linking it to other systems. It reminded me of vines grown through an old building, bracing it even as they cracked the stone. He did not remove the heart. He added to it. The canister's lid retracted. The spare heart, trailing a bundle of symbiont threads like roots, descended into the cavity. March positioned it beside the first, then directed the overhead arms to anchor it to the existing web. The symbiont strands from both hearts reached for each other. Where they touched, they fused, forming thicker ropes. Enzyme markers triggered. I saw the shift on my monitor's spectral display. They were built to recognize each other, to welcome connection. On a side screen, a metabolic graph rose and stabilized. The donor's chest now held two hearts beating in coordination, feeding a shared circulation. "Of course," I murmured. "Redundancy by accumulation. They never remove, they stack." The procedure continued. He added a lung next, grafting it into the lattice of vessels. Then a segment of liver. Then a small gland I did not recognize, nestled near the spine. Each piece came with its own symbiont root system. Each mesh wove itself into the existing network inside the donor's torso, until his original organs became only part of a crowded landscape. The web wrapped around his ribs, threaded along his spine, crept up his neck. The donor's eyes stayed open. At some point, his expression shifted from panic to a sort of dazed absence. The overhead display indicated a sedation increase. He was awake enough to be technically conscious, perhaps to satisfy some clause of doctrine about mutual awareness, but not enough to do more than twitch while his insides were rearranged. March worked without hurry. His focus never wavered. At a pause, he rolled his shoulders, stretching, and the camera angle caught his chest harness more clearly. Beneath the translucent mesh, some of his own symbiont bundles glistened. They were not just inert cargo. A few strands flexed in time with movements from the donor. When the donor's new second heart settled into rhythm, one of March's reserve organs also shifted slightly, as if responding to a signal. This is a network, I realized. Not just within a body, between bodies. It made sense. If you treat people as modular assemblies, you build systems that can plug parts in and out between them. You do not want to waste a good graft if one host fails. The next stage proved it. March moved to the donor's right forearm. Using delicate cuts, he isolated a length of bone and muscle along the outer side, preserving the main nerves. He then excised a matching section from his own secondary forearm along the harness, an extra limb I had not fully registered before, small and underused. He swapped them. The donor's forearm bone, now bare of muscle, went into a waiting frame on the wall. March's muscled piece, threaded with symbiont attachments, slid into place on the donor. The symbionts laced into the host's nerve sheath with unsettling eagerness. The donor flexed his fingers weakly. The motion was wrong. as if someone else were trying on his limb from the inside. On March's side, the missing section in his own arm closed over with transparent gel. Threads within it began spinning a scaffold to refill the gap with something else. Everything in that room assumed that bodies were temporary scaffolds for a more important structure, the web of symbionts connecting them. And those symbionts, under magnification on my screen, carried the unmistakable signature of Therapy Line Kappa. Same base enzyme set, similar receptor loops, a particular trio of tags in sequence that had been added as a tracing tool by the original design team, myself included. We had joked about it. If the scaffold ever shows up out in the wild, we can tell it is ours. There it was, centuries down a well, holding a future's organs together. In our time, Kappa had been designed to respond to damage. When cells around it began to fail, it would flood the area with growth signals and encourage their repair. The problem had been that it never knew when to stop. It turned every injury into an excuse to keep building, even when building meant suffocating. We had tried to fix that with kill switches, metabolic locks, little off buttons that would trigger under certain conditions. Most of those had failed. A few had worked too well. An entire generation of scaffolds had collapsed when someone triggered the wrong condition. The therapy had been retired. The continuity had started from those leftovers. They had tuned Kappa's descendants until the growth was sustainable. They had probably pruned out any kill switches they could find. But the lineage was still there, the same activation triggers, the same dependencies. If I could find a way to reach those buried switches with something new, something the continuity could not filter out before it hit the symbionts, we might be able to make their scaffolds fail again. Not just in one body, across their network. The idea was ugly. It would mean taking everything Kappa had ever been and turning it into a weapon. One that targeted people who had grown up knowing nothing else. On the screen, the donor's chest was now a dense forest of organ grafts and webbing. His original bones were buried under layers of support. The overhead display marked his status as integrated partial. March looked up at the camera. For a moment it felt like he was looking directly into our medbay, through my eyes. "This is integration," he said at last. The feed translated his words in simple text along the bottom. "We do this with care. We do not waste. We do not discard." He placed a hand flat on the donor's chest, between the two hearts. "When we add you to us, it will be the same. You will be carried. You will circulate. Parts of you will reach places your own ships never saw." He turned away, issuing instructions to his staff. The feed narrowed to a summary view and then cut. I sat in the silence of my office nook and listened to my own breath, steady but a touch faster than resting. On my display, Kappa's signature tags glowed like little criminal fingerprints. I had spent years trying to mitigate that line's consequences. Now, in a ship pinned near a horizon, watching a future built on those same mistakes, I saw a way to turn them inside out. If I could design an intervention that only triggered inside Kappa-descended scaffolds, using their own dependencies against them, I might be able to make the continuity's precious web crumble. Their extra organs would go first. Their shared networks would convulse. Their carefully balanced bodies would fail. It would also very likely kill every integrated donor and anyone dependent on those systems for basic function. In other words, almost all of them. I thought of the boardroom where we had once weighed a marginal increase in cancer risk against a marginal decrease in tissue loss. Then I thought of a man in a chair whose forearm had just been swapped like a replaceable tool, and of a surgeon who talked about my crew as if they were a bank he could withdraw from. Rios had asked me for leverage. I looked at the symbiont signatures and the old, cursed notes we still carried in our archives, and I realized something that settled in my gut like a piece of cooling metal. Leverage, in this case, meant becoming the worst version of myself on purpose. I brought my findings to Rios in person. On the way to command, I passed crewmen watching the short, heavily edited version of the integration feed I had authorized. I had cut out the worst of the cutting, left enough to make clear what the continuity meant by integration. The men watching were quiet. Some stared, others turned away, fists clenched. In command, Rio stood alone with the external view magnified. The dynasty hung above us, its ribs stark against the star-smeared backdrop. "You watched it?" I leaned on the rail beside him. "Twice." His voice felt scraped out. "You and your colleagues built the foundation for that?" "Not for that." I tapped the side console, pulling up the symbiont markers. "For healing. They turned the scaffolds into a skeleton for an entire way of living. But yes, fundamentally that is our mess. My mess." He looked at the markers. "And now?" "Now I think I can kill them. Not with bullets or plasma. From the inside." He straightened. "Explain." I kept it short. No lectures, no diagrams, just the essentials. How Kappa's descendants still carried certain enzyme dependencies and receptive sites. How their scaffolds leaned on a narrow slice of metabolic chemistry to keep from collapsing. How I might reintroduce an updated kill switch that would only activate in that environment. If we get enough of this into their system, through blood, through tissue, through whatever pathway we can reach, it should travel the same routes their symbionts use. I finished. Once it hits critical mass, it will trip the scaffolds. They will start failing. Organs will lose support. Everything they have grafted together will come apart. And us? Rios's gaze stayed on the black outside. Any chance this bounces back? The tailored trigger should only work in the presence of Kappa-derived tags and a specific symbiont environment, I answered. Our crew do not carry that. Not yet. If we give ourselves the agent, it will just pass through and be excreted. And if you are wrong? I am not planning to dose the whole ship, I replied. Just a few key vectors. He turned to look at me fully. Vectors. I met his eyes. People who let themselves be taken aboard. Volunteers who submit to integration with this seeded in them. Once they are part of the continuity web, the agent will spread. He took that in without flinching. His expression did not change much, but some small tension in his shoulders shifted. You are proposing to make guided missiles out of human beings. I am proposing to use myself and anyone else who chooses it as a poison they cannot remove once they taste it, I corrected. This is not theoretical for me, Rios. That man in the chair they carved up. He had no say in how his life ended. If we do nothing, that is what they will do to us. I tapped my own sternum. I am willing to go first. I helped birth the scaffolds they use. If anyone deserves to shut them down from the inside, it is me. Rios studied me for a long heartbeat. Outside, the black disk turned slowly. Or maybe that was just us sliding along our orbit. This is not a choice for today, he murmured. But if we reach that edge, he nodded once. I am not going to pretend I will stop you. He looked back at the dynasty. For now, we still have a rest period before March calls for our answer. I intend to use it to find every other option we have, but I needed to know we were not completely without teeth. You have teeth, I told him. They are just hidden in the wrong bodies. He snorted, a brief, humorless sound. Get back to medbay. Start working out the details. Quietly. No records outside your own secured logs. If this leaks, someone might decide to shortcut the volunteering stage. He was right. Desperation could make even good men push others into sacrifice. I built the weapon in the same place I once set broken arms and flushed burns. Medbay felt smaller with the dynasty hanging above us. The monitors along the wall carried 2 sets of readouts now, crew vitals and symbiont response curves. Our future and our mistake, side by side. The agent itself was simple in outline. That is how truly dangerous things like to look. First step, a carrier. I started with a viral shell, the kind we used back home to deliver gene fixes into marrow. An empty delivery van that knows how to slip into cells without triggering every alarm on the way. Second step, a payload. I dug through Kappa's old design until I found the fragment that had worked too well, the one that told the scaffold to dismantle itself when a certain metabolic threshold was crossed. We had buried it after it had eaten whole test cultures by accident. Third step, a key. The continuity's symbionts had acquired new dependencies over the centuries, a particular cofactor in their blood chemistry, a byproduct of the synthetic nutrient mix they lived on. That compound did not exist in our crew. If I tied the self-destruct trigger to the presence of that molecule, the payload would stay dormant in anyone else. In plain language, I built a tiny instruction that says, if you find yourself inside a Kappa-descended scaffold soaked in continuity blood, pull everything apart. We called it the reversion key in the notes, because calling it what it really was, an engineered collapse, felt like writing a confession in advance. I tested the first draft on the scrap of symbiont web we had kept in stasis. A few drops of agent onto the gel, a little warmth to wake it. A thin wash of simulated continuity serum across the surface. On the monitor, the strands responded in sequence. At first, they did what scaffolds always do, absorbed, distributed, tried to fold the new arrival into their routine. Then the key found its tags. The curves on my screen stopped rising and began to fall. The strands turned from flexible cords into something like overcooked muscle. They lost their tension, sagged, then tore under their own weight. Nodes that had once been busy junctions shrank and darkened. After a few minutes, the whole smear slumped into a formless mass. No clean explosion, no dramatic melt, just structural failure spreading through a web that thought it was invincible. I watched the replay twice, then locked the sample away in a lead-lined drawer, as if that could contain the idea. Rios stood in the doorway when I turned back to the room. He must have been there longer than I realized. He had that stillness he used when he did not want to interrupt. "You found their off switch," he observed. "I built them a new one," I answered, "out of old parts." He stepped inside, eyes on the monitor where the collapsed smear still showed as a flat line. "How targeted is it?" "Tight." I pulled up the summary on the wall. It only triggers where 3 conditions line up: Kappa descent tags, symbiont density above a certain level, and that continuity cofactor in circulation. Our crew do not meet those. Other human lines probably do not, unless they went down the same particular gene tunnel. "And once it fires?" "Scaffolds fail," I told him. "Not instantly. It will feel from the inside like a cascade of organ support systems giving out. Extra hearts losing their bracing, grafts slumping, shared networks going dark." "And the hosts?" "They die," I answered. "No way to soften that. Anyone who depends on the symbionts for vital support goes with them." He leaned against the cabinet and folded his arms. "Including volunteers carrying this thing into the web." "Including me," I agreed. "If they integrate us the way they did that donor we saw, the reversion key will light up every scaffold it touches. It will climb through the network that holds their society together and start taking it apart." He watched my face, weighing something. "You are certain you want to be inside that when it happens?" "I am the one who signed off on Kappa originally," I reminded him. "If anyone should be present when the line ends, it should be me." "That is not an answer to the actual question." "If we do nothing, they will eat us slowly. If we do what March wants, they will eat some of us slowly and keep the rest as dependent guests. If we do this, some of us get turned into weapons and they collapse near the horizon instead of climbing out to keep doing this to someone else." I looked past him toward the bulkheads, to where the dynasty hovered. "If there is a version of this story where they stop on their own, I have not seen it." He nodded, short and sharp. "You will not go alone." "You need someone left to run the ship," I countered. "I need someone on their side who is not you," he replied. "If you black out on the table before the key spreads far enough, someone still coherent has to make sure they keep taking tissue. Volunteers. They will be more likely to listen to their captain than to their doctor." I stared at him. For a moment, the thought of Rios strapped to that continuity chair landed harder than any hypothetical boardroom argument. "You are not," I started. He cut me off with a small hand gesture. "I am not here to argue ethics. We are past that stage. You gave me leverage. I will use it. But we will do it with eyes open. You and I both go. We let the crew choose who else joins the Vector team." That last phrase hurt. We had turned ourselves into jargon. "How many?" I asked. "A small group, enough mass to matter, not so many that we strip the ship bare." He looked around medbay. "You have your weapon. I have a burn profile that will drop Vestige just deep enough that they cannot reach us once they realize what is happening. We put both into motion at once." I pictured it. Us going up, the ship going down. 2 arcs crossing in the well, each choosing a different kind of death. "How long does the agent take to work?" Rios asked. "Minutes in a smear," I answered. "In a body full of living scaffolds and redundant organs, maybe longer. But their whole design philosophy relies on pushing support through shared webs. The more they try to compensate, the more paths they open for the key. Once it starts, it will not stop politely." He pushed off the cabinet. "Then we time our burn for when you report first signs of failure. That gives you enough window to hurt them, and us enough window to drop out of arm's reach." "You are talking about cutting our own path to any outside future," I pointed out. He met my gaze without flinching. "There is no outside future left that looks anything like what we were trained for. We are already in someone else's endgame. The only thing we get to control now is which wrong thing we do on the way down." He let the silence sit, then added quietly, "Write down what you are doing. Full records. If anyone survives out there long enough to find this, they should know this was a choice, not an accident." I looked at the collapsed smear on the screen one more time, then turned to my console. My fingers felt heavier than usual as I opened a fresh log. "Then we should start telling the story," I murmured, "before it tells itself without us." We did not assemble the crew for speeches. We did not have the power margins for that many people off station, and we did not have the stomach. Rios made a brief announcement over intercom. The continuity's offer had been declined. A different course had been chosen. A small team would be transferring to the dynasty under pretext of negotiation and limited integration. Anyone willing to take part should report to their department leads. No details broadcast, no mention of viral carriers or internal collapse. Just a quiet call for those who would step forward. I waited in medbay and tried not to guess who might show. The first through the door was Lennick, walking stiff but unsupported on his healed leg. He wore a fresh pressure suit, helmet clipped to his belt. "Do not tell me you need me ambulatory long-term," he began before I could speak. "If this is a one-way transfer, I am prime stock. Bone is strong, heart is boringly normal, no chronic anything. You literally patched me up for resale." "You are not a crate of fruit," I told him. "Feels like it," he countered. "But if going over there with you means they choke on us instead of chewing, I sign up." He held my gaze, waiting to see if I would treat him like a child or a colleague. I nodded once. "You understand what we are doing?" "I understand enough," he answered. "You are putting something in us that kills their scaffolds. We go in, they start plugging us into the furniture, and eventually the furniture collapses." He shrugged. "I would rather be part of that than part of their pantry." The phrasing was rough, but he was not wrong. A navigation tech came next, a quiet man named Osei, who spent more time watching the numbers under the view than the view itself. Then Garrett from hull repairs, muttering about paying the bastards back for scratching his ship. In total, 8 men volunteered for the Vector team, not counting Rios and me. We did not accept all of them. I made case-by-case calls, balancing physical fitness against what their absence would do to the crew staying behind. I kept the Vector group small. Myself, Rios, Lennick, Osei, and one more from engineering whose skills overlapped enough with others that losing him would not cripple Vestige's skeleton crew. The others I thanked and turned away. That was its own cruelty. "When you write this up," Garrett muttered as he left, "make sure you mention who wanted in and did not get the honor." "You really see it that way?" I asked. He paused at the hatch. "Doc, when history bodies this whole mess down to a sentence, I do not want it to read they were dragged. I want it to read they jumped with a knife in their teeth." Fair enough. The pre-treatment took most of a shift. I loaded each vector with the reversion key via infusion, the carrier suspended in a clear solution that looked like any other drip. To the naked eye, it was indistinguishable from a vitamin. The viral shells would home in on marrow and liver first, then spread to other tissues. They would sit quiet there, instructions folded, waiting for the continuity's blood chemistry to bathe them and the symbiont tags to brush past. Biologically, it felt almost gentle. No immediate fever, no pain beyond the sting of a needle. The violence would come later. As I slid the cannula into Rios's arm, he watched the bag without any visible flinch. "Feels anticlimactic," he remarked. "You wanted fireworks." I checked the line, then taped it down. "Would be easier on the nerves," he answered. "It is strange to know your death is currently drifting down a tube in such a polite trickle." "You can still back out," I told him. "You are under no obligation to—" "Stop." He turned his head and fixed me with a look. "We are not doing the dance where you fake giving me an exit, and I fake considering it." "Force of habit," I admitted. He softened a fraction. "You have spent your whole life trying to keep people from walking into things that hurt. This is counter to everything in you, I get that. But if you keep offering to take this alone, I am going to start questioning your basic arithmetic." "What arithmetic?" "You go, you get a window on their inside, but you are one pair of eyes. We both go, we double the chances that one of us stays conscious long enough to see this through," he answered. "And we split the guilt. That matters to me." He was right. Guilt had weight. Sharing it did not lessen what we were about to do, but it changed how it would be remembered, if anyone ever read the log. We finished the infusions in silence. I ran quick scans afterward to confirm the carriers had taken hold. The symbiont tags in the constructed sample we kept as a control lit up when exposed to a microdose from our blood. The key was moving. In a quiet hour before the transfer, I wrote. I logged the technical details, design decisions, trigger conditions, fail-safes. Then I wrote the part that mattered more, in words a future medic might actually feel. "We chose this," I typed. "We were not tricked. The continuity believed our bodies were theirs by right. They built a doctrine around consuming their own past to sustain a brittle future. We chose to end that line here, in the well, even though it meant ending ourselves too. If you are reading this, and you are tempted to build another web that treats people as parts, let this be your example of where that road lands." Then I closed the log, sealed it with medboard authority codes that probably meant nothing to anyone outside our time, and pushed it into the ship's archival buffer. Rios organized the burn plan on his side, a precisely timed thrust sequence that would drop Vestige's orbit by a slim margin. Not enough to cross the horizon at once, but enough to slide us below the band where the dynasty could match our depth without tearing itself apart. He explained it to me in 3 short lines in command, tracing arcs in the air with his finger. "Once I trigger this, our path is set. No climb back out, no later rescue. We will ride it until either the drives fail or the hull does." "And if you do not trigger it?" "Then we sit where we are until the fuel runs dry and March keeps sending pods," he answered. "We all know how that ends." We did not argue beyond that. We had run out of room to pretend the universe owed us a third option. We presented our acceptance to March with the composure you get when your mind has already left your body 3 steps ahead. In the next scheduled contact, Rios kept his shoulders square and his voice even. "We acknowledge that we cannot climb out of this well alone," he told the screen. "We will send a limited group to you for integration as proof of intent. In return, You will assist us in raising Vestige to a safer orbit while we decide on further transfers." March's primary face relaxed into something like satisfaction. "You come quickly to clarity, Captain. The well sharpens decisions." He glanced over our vector roster as we transmitted it. His gaze paused on my name. "Dr. Sachs," he noted. "You choose integration after all. I admit, I did not fully expect that." "You made a compelling anatomical argument," I answered. "If some of us have to be cut up, better that I be there to supervise. Your presence will honor the procedure." He inclined his head. "We will prepare to receive you. Docking corridor will extend once you approach. Leave your ship's airlock sealed until we confirm pressure compatibility. I would not have the route suffocate in a corridor." "How considerate," Rios murmured after the channel closed. "Part of the service," I replied. We launched in a shuttle, not a pod. Vestige carried a small tendercraft for short-range surveys and emergency evacuations. This was technically both. The Vector team strapped in with the practiced movements of men who had done drills 100 times and believed none of them would ever matter. Now every buckle click sounded like a closing door. From the pilot seat, Osei guided us on a gently rising arc toward the Dynasty. Through the forward canopy, the black hole's disk occupied the lower half of vision, a circle of total absence ringed by a distorted smear of distant stars. The continuity ship loomed above that void, poised on its invisible fields. Its ribs and plates were clearer at this range, each one marked by scars from past repairs. A vessel built to last in tough places. "Vestige, this is Dynasty," came March's voice over the open channel. "We are extending a capture arm. Stay within the corridor. Do not deviate." One of the pods along their flank uncoiled like a limb, revealing an inner spine and a series of grips. At its end, a docking ring unfolded, petals opening to present a receiving collar. "Looks like a flower," Lennox muttered. "One of those carnivorous ones." "Hold that thought for after we land," I said. Osei matched our drift to the movement of the arm with small bursts of thrusters. The docking ring swelled in the forward view until it filled most of it. Contact registered as a soft thud and a brief shiver. Locks engaged around us with a series of mechanical clicks, followed by a deeper thrum as pressure equalization began between the shuttle and the continuity corridor. The hull around us creaked in tiny adjustments. I felt the reversion key's presence in my body only as a knowledge, not a sensation. A quiet, held breath in the marrow. Beside me, Rios checked the status panel. "Dock confirms hard seal, pressure equalized, gravity vector roughly aligned." "This is it then," Lennox muttered behind us. "Last chance to change your mind," I told him, half out of habit, half because I would have hated myself if I did not offer. "Doc, if you can walk into that place full of your own ghosts, I can manage a corridor." We cycled the shuttle hatch and stepped into the arm. The docking corridor was wider than ours, formed from nested rings of material that gave underfoot like a firm mat. The walls were not bare metal. They were clad in panels with a faint fibrous texture, as if someone had laminated strips of cartilage onto steel. Overhead, a line of lamps ran along the spine, their light slightly warmer than our own. The air was cooler here and carried a chemical tang, sharp and clean, undercut by something earthy and sweet. Preservatives and long-lived bodies. Our helmets were clipped to our belts. We walked this stretch with faces open, partly for trust, partly because any filters we built into our suits would be meaningless once we were inside their tissues. At the far end of the corridor, a hatch irised open. March waited there with 2 attendants. In person, or as in person as a screen allows, he was much as before. The secondary face fused along his jaw, asleep and sealed. The reserve organs under his chest mesh moving in their own rhythms. The tools along his forearms sheathed and latched. His attendants showed different configurations. One had extra arms sprouting from his rib cage, each thinner than a normal limb, built for fine manipulation. The other walked with reinforced legs that bent at an extra joint, braces running up his thighs. They studied us with a sort of hungry curiosity I recognized from med conferences when a rare case entered the room. "Welcome aboard the Dynasty," March greeted us. "We are honored to receive you." "No offense," Rios answered, "but the sensation is not mutual." March's mouth twitched. "Honesty. Good. It will make the transition cleaner." He gestured down the corridor behind him. "We will begin with Dr. Sachs. Archivist protocols require that the originating architect of a scaffold's lineage be integrated personally, when available. The rest of you will be processed in sequence." I glanced at my team. Osei looked calm, but his hand rested on the strap of his harness, as if it were the only solid thing left. "Stay focused," I told them quietly. "Remember why we are here." "And remember I am still on comms," Rios added. A small mic at his collar gleamed under the continuity lights. "Once we are in position, I will start the countdown on our burn. We will not leave you hanging." "If you do, you owe me a drink," Lennox tried. "If we both survive this, I will owe you an entire bottle," I returned. It was easier to walk forward after that. The interior of the Dynasty resembled the integration theater we had seen on the feed, scaled up to a whole ship. Corridors curved gently, not straight, as if grown along invisible lines of load. Panels along the walls were marked with maintenance symbols, small, clean icons showing where symbiont conduits ran just under the surface. Some sections pulsed faintly with circulation, moving fluids toward unseen organs. Crewmen passed us with the relaxed balance of people accustomed to varied gravity fields. Grafts showed in glimpses, an extra lung bulging under a collarbone, a line of reinforcing cartilage at the back of a neck, a translucent sac on one hip holding a pale organ like a coiled hand. No one stared. They looked, assessed, then returned to their tasks. We were interesting, but we were not the center of their day. We were just a long-planned shipment finally delivered. March escorted us to a branching point. 2 attendants peeled off with Rios and the others, guiding them toward adjacent prep rooms. He stopped in front of a hatch and looked at me. "This is the main theater," he explained. "I will perform your integration personally. It is fitting." "I would not want to end up as a rush job," I replied. He seemed almost amused. "No, you are precious stock. Your tissues will seed new lines, close old gaps, correct instabilities we have been forced to accept for too long." "Then let us make sure you get a good look," I answered. "I would hate for you to miss anything important." That double meaning made my throat dry. He only heard the surface. Inside, the integration theater matched the one from the feed almost exactly. Chair, restraints, overhead arms, organ racks along the walls. The smell here was sharper than in the corridor, a mix of antiseptic, preserved tissues, and the iron damp of fresh surgery. A low table stood to one side with a set of instruments arranged in precise rows. Some were familiar: scalpels, clamps, forceps. Others looked like hybrids of bone and steel, shaped to hook, twist, and anchor symbiont strands without tearing them. March gestured to the chair. "Remove your upper garments and lie back." I unsealed my suit down to the waist, folding it aside. The air bit at my skin, cooler than our ship's controlled climate. The chair's surface gave a little, molded to my shoulders as I lay down. Restraints closed over wrists, ankles, chest, and forehead with gentle clicks. "You understand what we are doing," he went on as he adjusted the overhead gantry. "We will not extinguish you. We will distribute you. Your cells will carry on in my chest, in my colleagues' limbs, in banks that will outlast your ship." He touched a finger to his harness where one of the reserve organs moved under mesh. "We are not coffin makers, Dr. Sachs. We are archivists who store in living flesh." "You treat people as shelves," I replied. "That is the problem." He paused, tools hovering. "Your age carved flesh freely into monuments for ideals, empires, gods. You had your shelves too. And we spent centuries trying to learn from that mistake," I answered. Some of us, anyway. He studied my face for a heartbeat, then inclined his head slightly. We learned as well. This is our version. He turned away before I could answer. Conversation over. The overhead arms descended. One delivered a fine injection along my throat, just above the collarbone. My vision blurred for a moment, then sharpened. Another injection into my sternum delivered local anesthesia that spread outward like cold fingers. Sedation only, March explained as he worked, snapping a translucent biofeedback cable from his wrist harness into a port on the headrest. You will remain conscious. The doctrine requires mutual awareness and shared circulation data between donor and receiver during transfer. Doctrine has some interesting hobbies, I muttered. The first cut surprised me only in its absence of pain. Sensation did not vanish. It changed. Pressure, tugging, warmth as fluid moved, but no immediate hurt. From my angle, all I saw was the edge of the field where my skin parted and clamps lifted it away. A strip of my own ribs showed pale under lights. Beyond the direct line of sight, the imaging display reflected in the overhead metal gave a ghosted map. My heart, lungs, liver, all lit in soft colors. The reversion key sat invisible inside those tissues, folded into cells, waiting. As he worked, March narrated in steady phrases. Not for my benefit, I realized, but for the recording. He noted each graft site, each connection. He spoke about me as if I were an important case study, which in his terms I was. Primary heart, moderate scar burden, he observed. No gross malformation. Coronary tree narrow by current standards, but adequate for graft. He introduced the first continuity organ, a compact, muscular sac that looked like a cross between a gland and a pump. Under its surface, a web of symbiont roots flexed in tiny waves. He placed it near my heart, in a pocket made for it. As the symbiont strands touched my own tissue, I felt a series of small, deep twitches. My chest seemed to grow heavier, as if someone had laid a warm stone inside it. You may feel fullness, March commented. Your system is learning to share. On a monitor, my blood chemistry shifted. The cofactor we had targeted in the key's design began to appear, introduced through the graft's internal reservoirs. Kappa tags in my cells acknowledged a familiar cousin in the symbiont roots and started to handshake. In the corner of my vision, a small icon on my inner wrist display lit, a private sensor I had set to watch for the cofactor's threshold. There it was. The first signal that the environment matched our trigger conditions. March added a secondary heart next, tucking it against my left lung. Its symbiont bundle spread quickly, latching onto the existing web. Fibers dug into my pericardium, wrapping, anchoring. The feeling was bizarre. A deep, non-local fullness, like being inflated from the inside in precise places. My own heart changed its rhythm to accommodate the new partner. The monitor displayed both pulses overlaid. I watched that overlay as carefully as I watched his hands. We had seeded ourselves with a collapse in search of a system. Now the system was hooking itself into us as fast as it could. How does it feel? March asked. Like I am on the wrong end of a plumbing project, I answered. He gave a short, genuine laugh. You have not lost your humor. Good. We prefer donors who stay themselves. The next graft slid in, a thin organ shaped like a twisted ribbon, laced with nerves. He placed it along my spine. Symbiont strands climbed my vertebrae, inching upward. I felt a line of pressure track up my back to the base of my skull. In med school, we practiced dissociation for surgeries. Focus on a separate point, detach observation from sensation. I tried now, but it was harder when every tick of the monitor also told me how close we were to turning the knife. The reversion key's activation curve started to rise. It manifested first as a subtle change in the symbiont bundle's behavior. On the display, their uptake rates shifted from smooth to jagged. A few nodes near the initial grafts began to spike in metabolic demand, then sag. Curious, March muttered, frowning. Local scaffold stress at the interface. Problem? I tried to keep my voice neutral. "Perhaps a minor incompatibility," he answered. "We tuned Kappa's descendants for long-term integration. Your tissues are from a much earlier stage. There may be surprises." I smiled. "We were full of surprises." He did not catch the extra meaning a second time either. He applied stabilizers, infusing a clear fluid through the symbiont web. For a moment, the activity curve smoothed. Then the reversion key met enough cofactor and tags at once to cross its internal tripwire. On my monitor, the enzyme profile shifted sharply. A set of instructions, dormant until now, unfolded like a spring. The first scaffold nodes to fail were the ones wrapped around the new organs in my chest. I felt it as a sudden loss of support, like the floor dropping half a centimeter under my ribs. The symbiont bundles tightened in reflex, trying to compensate. That reflex sent signals along the web, urging other sections to brace. The key rode those signals outward, its carriers moving along the same links. Within seconds, the failure spread beyond my grafts. A red band flowed across the display region labeled Host Support Structures. Symbiont threads in March's existing network, where they reached into the edges of my tissue, began to degrade. Their stiffness went first, then their coherence. They frayed into strands that could not hold weight. "What is this?" March snapped, stepping back. There was real alarm in his voice. "Scaffold collapse beyond tolerance." He cued neutralizers, calling up chemical patches designed to calm overactive webs. They flowed into the grafts. The key ignored them. This was not runaway growth. This was dissolution written into the scaffold's deepest assumptions. Somewhere beyond the room, alarms began to stutter through the ship. A deep, distant tone that reverberated through the floor. March's extra organs under his harness twitched erratically. One of the sacs along his ribs clenched and did not fully relax. The symbiont strands linking it to his main systems began to change color on his own internal display. He looked down in confusion. "Impossible." "Not impossible," I managed. "Just overdue." He turned on me with a surgeon's fury. "What did you infect yourself with?" "An apology. From your ancestors." He reached for a manual override, probably to clamp off graft connections, but his hand stopped halfway. The muscles of his forearm spasmed. A section of his secondary arm slumped, losing tone as its scaffolds failed. The overhead cameras caught it all. They must have been streaming to his command crew. Somewhere on his bridge, someone would be watching their archivist surgeon come apart. The room around us lurched. The dynasty depended on its symbiont web not just for bodies, but for some load-bearing tasks within the hull. When enough of those supports failed, structures shifted. An overhead conduit split with a wet crack. Fluid spilled, splashing across the floor in a slick sheet. One of the attending medics lost his footing and went down, bracing on a console that sagged under his weight. Through my implant mic, I heard Rios in my ear, distant but clear. "We are reading internal disturbance on their ship," he reported. "Vibrations, thermal spikes. I am starting the burn." Somewhere inside Vestige, thrusters fired. The tug in my gut shifted slightly, a tiny change in gravity vector that told me our ship was altering its path. "You cannot." March's breath hitched. Sweat stood on his brow. "You are the root. You are meant to stabilize us, not—" His words broke off as one of the reserve organs under his mesh hardened and then tore its own anchors. Pain flattened his features. He grabbed the edge of the table to stay upright. His fingers left red streaks where nails dug in. "This is what happens," I forced out, each word a push, "when you build a future on human bodies and call it duty." The key did not care about speech. It moved according to the logic built into it. Find kappa tags, meet cofactor, uncurl, dismantle. I felt my own chest begin to fail in earnest now. The grafts, already clumsy guests in my thoracic cavity, lost the scaffolding that kept them in place. One shifted, something tore, my vision dimmed at the edges, then brightened in narrow flashes. Pain arrived in full, no longer damped by local anesthesia. It was not a sharp spike, but a crushing, pervasive pressure, as if the weight of the well had finally found its way inside my ribs. I heard dimly the sounds of more ruptures in the ship. Somewhere, 2 decks away, a major symbiont trunk must have failed. A deep structural groan rolled through the theatre. March collapsed to one knee beside the table. His secondary face sagged, the sealed eye bulging briefly as internal support shifted. The tools along his arms spilled from their sheaths, clattering to the floor. "You are killing us!" he gasped. He stared at me, comprehension and something like betrayed faith warring in his expression. "We waited ages for you. And you used that time," I choked, "to learn how to carve people. Better." A monitor somewhere behind my head cracked. Sparks spat. The lights overhead strobed from full to dim as power flicked between grids. Through the implant, I caught another fragment of Rios. "Burn complete," he reported. "Orbit dropping. They will not follow us without tearing apart what is left of their hull." There was a sound under his words, the strain of Vestige's framework as it adjusted to a new, deeper path. Some of our own supports would be cracking, but no symbiont web tied us together. Metal yields predictably. Flesh, less so. The pain in my chest rose to a level that no training or dissociation could bridge. My breath came in shallow pulls. Each heartbeat felt like a separate, uncertain decision. March slumped fully now, half against the table, half on his knees. His hands clutched his harness as if he could hold his organs in place by will alone. "We only wanted to survive," he whispered. "So did we," I told him, or thought I did. The words might have stayed in my head. The world narrowed. The overhead arms blurred, their movements jerky as control circuits flickered. The edges of the room darkened until only the area directly above me remained in focus. A patch of ceiling where a small crack had opened, gentle flakes of some composite material drifting down. Beyond that crack, somewhere outside the hull, the black disk waited, indifferent. I felt one last deep stutter in my chest as the scaffolds finally let go. For a brief, lucid moment, I realized that the guilt I had carried from that old therapy line, those children on New Sol, had not been erased. Their suffering did not become justified because I weaponized the same tools here. It simply joined a larger chain. But for once, the chain ended with us. Then the black in my vision swallowed the rest. The survey craft approached the well on a narrow arc, its hull oriented so that the black hole's disk stayed off to one side of the forward window. The pilot knew better than to stare into that circle for long. Men who did sometimes lost the sense of where they were headed. His name was Ewan Cowell. He flew for a minor archival outfit out of a cluster world that had never been part of the old consortium. They had picked up a set of faint transponder whispers in the radio noise near the Galactic Center, relics from an age when ships still carried codes no one used anymore. Someone in the outfit's office had run a cross-reference out of curiosity and found that those codes matched a line of missions launched from Earth centuries before it cracked into factions. A gravity well survey, left on the books, never properly closed. Ewan's brief was simple. Follow the whispers as far as was sane, record what remained, and come back. He did not expect to find both ships still there. The first resolved on his scopes as a warped, lopsided structure hanging just above the black margin. At that depth, his instruments struggled. Time dilation bent their readings, adding lag to everything. He compensated manually, leaning back into skills his training sims rarely used. The vessel was larger than the old schematics for Vestige. When he brought the image up on the main display, he saw why. Ribs, arches, a hull that looked grown as much as built. Sections hung broken, plates peeled back. Long, stiffened tendrils jutted outward, frozen mid-curve. The inside of some of those tendrils showed the remnants of fibrous webs, dried to a dull, cracked texture. The beacon tags identified it as Dynasty, though the name had never been recorded in his own civilization's histories. Its transponder ping spluttered now, an ancient tone slowed by the well, repeating a charter statement that no longer had any legal meaning. Closer inspection revealed damage that did not match simple age. At multiple points along the hull, internal supports had failed in ways that suggested cascading collapse rather than external strike. Bulkheads had fallen inward. Compartments had imploded under their own weight. The shadows within glowed faintly in his ship's imaging. Outlines of internal organs and fluid reservoirs turned to pulp, then long since evaporated or frozen. He circled once, carefully staying at a respectful distance. Even with modern drives descending much deeper than this invited trouble. His ship's systems threw constant caution markers. On the far side of the dynasty, deeper in the well, another shape clung to its tight path. Vestige was smaller than he expected from the legends, a compact vessel built for function more than comfort. One side of its hull showed clear scars from some past event, a missing panel, a section replaced with non-matching plating, but the overall structure held. Its orbit sat lower than the continuity ships by a narrow margin, enough that, in their day, matching depths would have pushed the larger vessel into dangerous territory. That line was marked in old pilot folklore, the depth beyond which you could neither hold safely nor climb without burning more than you carried. Vestige's transponder whispered its name at long intervals, slowed by the well until each repetition took several of his minutes. No one answered its calls anymore. Life support signatures were long gone. The ship tumbled slowly, arrested by its own corrections sometime in the distant past, and left to drift through the same tight loop over and over. Ewan brought his craft into a position between the two, at a radius his own systems judged marginal but survivable. He connected to the continuity ship first. Its data stores resisted his handshake with outdated encryption, but the keys were worn. The archival outfit had invested in good translation filters, old protocols unfolded one by one. Inside he found logs, records of a civilization that had once obsessed over lineages, over purity, over keeping bodies tightly within a narrow band of acceptable traits. Records of the doctrine of descent, the planning for a great journey down the well to retrieve ancestral stock. The last entries were more chaotic. Alarm reports, medical logs tracking a sudden mysterious collapse in scaffolds, a final stream from an integration theatre where an archivist surgeon named March struggled to understand why his own support organs were failing. Ewan watched enough of that to grimace and stop the playback. He had seen men and machines die before, but there was something particularly unsettling about watching a whole design philosophy come undone from within. He tagged the files for full archival back home. Then he turned to Vestige. Its systems were simpler, their language older but somehow more straightforward. The ship had been built before his own society and long before the continuity's complex graft culture. Its archived logs opened with less resistance, like a door that had not been locked, only forgotten. He skimmed down through months of routine entries, sensor readings, crew rotations, minor medical issues handled with antibiotic and rest. Then the tone changed. At the point where their orbit dipped too deep, the logs grew sparse and urgent. Mission notes turned into survival notes, mentions of a ship from the future descending to meet them. A watermark of an unfamiliar hull design hung in the corner of several entries. He found Dr. Henry Sax's log by accident, while searching for something else. It was marked as a medical record, but its title carried a personal stamp. On the termination of therapy line Kappa and the continuity of consequences. He opened it. Sax's voice came through in text and video, the footage grainier than modern standards, but clear enough. A middle-aged man with tired eyes, medbay behind him, speaking to the recorder as if to someone sitting just off frame. Ewan watched in compressed time. The log laid out the technical matter first. The origin of the Kappa scaffold, its withdrawal after early failures, its apparent survival into the continuity's symbiont web. Then the reversion key, described plainly, without flourish. A final kill switch, tailored and deliberate. Sachs did not justify himself. He did not dress the choice up as heroism. He called it what it was, an act of ending. "We did this," he concluded, "not to redeem past mistakes. Those stand. We did it because looking up at the ship that came for us, we saw a line of thinking stretched further than we had ever intended, and we could not stand the thought of it climbing out of this well to stretch further still. So we cut it here, at ourselves." He paused as if choosing his last line. If anyone out there is considering building a world on top of human bodies and calling it necessity, look into this well and remember what it cost the last ones who tried. The log ended. Ewan sat back in his seat, staring at the frozen last frame. Sachs, looking into the camera, medbay lighting casting sharp planes across his face. No melodrama, just a man who had finally run out of alternatives. Outside the window, the dynasty hung half-broken just above the black horizon. Vestige tumbled deeper, keeping its own bruised orbit. He thought about what his own culture asked of bodies. Not as dramatic as what he had just seen, but still, long shifts, harsh worlds, the occasional quiet push to use certain genetic tweaks in the name of efficiency. He thought about lines and where they stopped. The archival outfit would be thrilled with this haul. They would dissect it across conferences and papers. Historians would argue over whether Sachs and Rios had done the right thing. Philosophers would draft neat frameworks. None of that changed the tangible reality. 2 ships trapped near a black hole, one gutted by the collapse of its own scaffolds, the other riding a lower path until the end of its fuel. Ewan tagged the logs with his own note before transmission. These records document not just the end of a mission and a doctrinal collapse, but a deliberate choice to limit how far a particular kind of harm could travel. Whatever judgment we pass, we inherit the safety created here. Remember that when you build. He sent the full package up the well via tight beam relay, timing the pulses to account for the stretched seconds near the horizon. Old signals climbed outward, carrying old guilt and its final expression. Then he turned his craft away. As he pulled back along his exit arc, the view shifted. The black disk moved from the side of the window to the lower edge, then to a smaller circle in his aft display. Between him and that circling absence, the husk of the dynasty stayed pinned at its depth, ribs stark against nothing. Below it, barely visible at this distance, Vestige traced its faint, stubborn loop a little closer to the line no one crosses. For a brief moment, as his ship's engines nudged him higher up the well, Ewan imagined he could see Sax's integration chair through the ruptured hull. A trick of the mind, he knew. Still, the image remained. A man lying under lights, chest open, choosing to be the stone that makes the web collapse. The well shrank behind him. Stars ahead brightened as the time warp eased. His navigation console fed him fresh, clean coordinates, unwarped by proximity to something that bent everything around it. He kept one last look on the aft display until the black circle became just another dark patch among many. Then he set his eyes forward and let the ships behind him circle, locked in their choice, holding a line no one else had managed to draw. If the universe had any sense of symmetry, the story of the continuity would end there. A broken hull caught forever just above a place where even light does not come back. And a small vessel deeper down, riding out its fuel, carrying within its data cores a doctor's decision and the record of how far he was willing to go to keep his descendants from treating him as stock. The image followed Ewan long after the well dropped off his scopes, ribs outlined against a falling sky, and beneath them a smaller shape circling and circling, its path unchanging, its message finally on its way out.